DeeRC says their brand new mini basher can do almost 60 miles an hour. Is that true? And if so, how did they do it? I'm definitely curious to see what's under the hood on this one, because at 56 miles an hour, this would be faster than the Arrma Typhon Grom brushless and the Traxxas Mini XRT. But first, from the outside, this does seem like a pretty nice looking car. The body design, while fairly generic, doesn't have a bunch of greebling stickers on it, which is nice to see. The body itself does appear to be Lexan and is medium thick, though it doesn't have any reinforcement on the inside because it uses standard body posts and pins. Whether you prefer these kinds of pins or a clipless system just depends on personal preference. They both definitely have their advantages and disadvantages. Of course, with this car, it's what's under the hood that's really interesting, because to do nearly 60 miles an hour and maintain control doesn't just take power, it takes a lot of precision as well. These wheels are a smaller clone of the Traxxas Rustler wheels, and I do like it in this matte silver paint. The tires are a pretty hard rubber and almost feel like plastic. The inside of the wheels appear to be screwed together, so let's go ahead and see what's going on with that. I'm definitely curious to see what DeeRC has done to make this thing capable of those high speeds. Companies like Hypergo tend to put a lot of power in their cars, but sometimes that power isn't very controllable. If this thing just goes fast but isn't controllable at those speeds, that's not really practical. And I'll be interested to see if they've just made it fast or if they've made it fast and good. These wheels appear to be standard bead locks. They've got a 3-part rim that clamps the tire on both sides, though there does not appear to be any foam inside. The lack of foam on this is a really interesting choice, especially for something that's supposed to go really fast. Though because these are bead locks, these tires may actually behave like air-filled tires. The tires really are just one part of the equation though. You need power, stability, and aerodynamics to reach the kind of speeds they're claiming, and hopefully this has all three. Let's dive in and take a closer look. On the surface, this does look like a fairly standard mini basher, though I don't think I've ever seen this chassis design before. One thing that jumps right out at me immediately is the use of Phillips head screws. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but a lot of people will associate these Phillips self-tappers with cheap cars. Especially when you start getting up in these price ranges, the appearance of quality is really important. And while this shock actually looks really nice, it's fully metal, has a decent amount of thick fluid in it, and isn't leaking, these screws kind of let it down a little bit. Under the cap, we do have a standard bladder style shock and plenty of fluid in here. And this fluid definitely is thicker than what I'm used to on most mini bashers. The spring is also stiffer, and I suspect both those things are to maintain stability at that high speed. The wheels are mounted with plastic 12mm hexes. And these hexes are a non-standard design. This design is actually stronger than a cross pin, but it makes it harder to upgrade. That additional strength comes from the fact that there's no hole in here, so this output is just a solid piece of metal. It's being driven by some pretty beefy dog bones. At 4.5mm, these are thicker in the middle than some 1/8 scale RC cars. They do thin out on the ends though, and that's so they don't bind on the cups during full articulation of the suspension. We do have bearings on here. These are shielded and not sealed. That's fine, but again, at this price range, I'd love to see sealed bearings. And then looking inboard, you can see the output cups on the differentials are actually reinforced, which I've never seen before on one of these. Unlike on the latest offering from MJX, these differentials are top loading, which means we've got quite a few screws to remove to get it out of here. The chassis on this car is a single injection molded piece of plastic, but they've chosen these thick metal plates for the front and rear for reinforcement. These plates feel lightweight, and yes, they are aluminum. By the shape, you can tell these are stamped, meaning they start as a flat sheet of aluminum, and then they're pressed between two dies to get this final shape. This aluminum is 2mm thick, which makes it pretty stout, and I don't think this is ever going to be a problem on a car this light. And being screwed in below the differential, it reinforces this entire area, which becomes pretty flexible without it. These arm hinge pins appear to be pretty standard, but it is worth noting that the A, B, C, and D blocks are molded into the chassis. So if you break one of these, you're going to be replacing this entire chassis. And that's something we might be doing because we're going to be trying out these brand new Proline ramps here in a few minutes, and they're really going to put this truck to the test. These arms feel pretty standard, nice and flexible. They should do just fine. Before we take a look at the differential, I think it's worth noting that this car has several different screw sizes. While this isn't the end of the world, keeping track of them can be a little bit more difficult than on something like a Grom, and is something that can make this car feel a little less advanced than some other modern bashers. Under that cover, it appears we have an all-steel differential. This feels pretty loose inside, and by loose, I don't necessarily mean there's something wrong, just that the fluid or grease they're using feels pretty thin. Again, we've got Phillips self-tappers on this differential. Of course, one advantage to Phillips head screws is that most people already have a Phillips screwdriver in their house. So I will say these are probably not actually Phillips, they're probably JIS, which is why they don't fit perfectly in any of my Phillips screwdrivers, though you usually can get away with a Phillips driver. Opening this up, it appears to have just a little bit of grease inside. We've got all sintered steel parts in here, and this is not a sealed differential, though we can get a closer look at those steel reinforcement rings on the output cups. These are designed to keep the output cups from spreading, which is one of the main reasons why they end up failing. This is something we've seen in the aftermarket on things like the X-Max, but I don't remember seeing it on a first-party car before. Driving that rear differential is a pretty standard looking steel spur gear driven by a steel pinion. We've got a steel hex-shaped center drive shaft going forward to the front differential. And being able to see the writing on this motor, I think I'm getting the first hint of how they're getting that top speed claim. We'll take a closer look at that in a second. But first, let me get this rear end put back together, then let's see what they're doing to keep this truck stable at nearly 60 miles an hour. To go fast, you need stability, and a lot of that stability comes from the steering geometry, but that steering geometry only works if things are tight and there's not a bunch of play in everything. A lot of minis suffer from an excess amount of steering play, but this one doesn't seem to. They're accomplishing that through using fairly tight pillow ball suspension. And while just like on the latest V6 Arrma cars, these pillow balls aren't adjustable, they appear to be set up pretty well from the factory so they don't have a bunch of play in them. Another typical place where you get a lot of slop are in these ball ends. Again, there's very little in these from the factory. We do have adjustable tie rods to set your toe, and then this steering rack also feels pretty tight. With that top plate removed, we can see we don't actually have bearings in here and the entire rack is plastic, but these pins that mount it to the chassis are really thick. At 4 millimeters, these are the same size as the pins you see on much larger cars. That's probably the biggest contributor to the stability of this rack, though without a good servo, that doesn't really mean much. This plastic top plate gives the servo a lot of stability, and hopefully the servo itself is good because it doesn't appear to be any standard size. It doesn't even have any mounting tabs on it. It's larger than a micro servo on a Grom, but I don't think it's quite mini servo size. And then pulling off this servo horn with integrated servo saver, pulling off this okay, I can't get that off of there. That means it's almost certainly screwed into steel or aluminum and then thread locked in. I don't want to break it, so we're not going to go any further with that end. On the electronics end, we can see they made some attempt to waterproof it, but I'm not sure that's going to matter. I will say though that the servo feels nice and smooth. The servo being smooth isn't a guarantee that it's high quality, but it is a good sign at least. Rounding out the front end, we do have a pretty nice looking bumper as well as a light if you're into that kind of thing, and another nice aluminum plate on the bottom for reinforcement and skid protection. Of course, all this is well and good, but the main thing that makes a car go fast is how much power it has. And according to the manual, at least, this thing has plenty of power with a 50 amp 3S ESC. 50 amps is a lot of jam for a small car like this, and I don't think I've ever seen this ESC before. It's got an integrated power button here, and the reason I said it didn't really matter if the servo was waterproofed is because you can see the bare board on this ESC, and it's very clearly not waterproof. The ESC to motor connectors are 3.5 millimeters, which is fairly standard for these small cars, but not standard for most other ESCs, which use 4 or 6.5 millimeter connectors. So if you want to upgrade the ESC or the motor, but not both, you're going to have to deal with those odd size connectors. Speaking of the motor, I think it's this brushless unit here that DeeRC is kind of using as their cheat code. This is a 2847 motor, but as you can see, it's 5480 kV. This thing comes with two pretty stout looking 3S batteries, which means we could see nearly 65,000 no-load RPM on this motor. Most motors really aren't rated to go that high, so I'm interested to see if this one can handle it. The wiring between the batteries and the ESC uses genuine AMAS Deans type connectors. These are pretty high quality. According to the Amazon advertisement, DeeRC says these are 45C. While I'm getting this hooked up to the LiPo dyno, if you like seeing technical deep dive teardowns of brand new cars, as well as crazy experiments and no BS, make sure you get subscribed because we're doing that here every day. I would choose 1800 milliamp hour. And as you can see, we've got 22C on these batteries from the LiPo dyno, which definitely isn't 45C, but is better than a lot of these smaller batteries that we see from these manufacturers. It's also worth noting that this will probably get a little bit better after a few charge cycles, and this C rating is dependent on temperature and a bunch of other factors, and it's also not the final word on the quality of a battery. To control all this power, we have a fairly generic looking receiver, and to go along with that, we've got a fairly generic looking transmitter, though it does have a throttle dual rate, which means we should be able to turn this thing down if we don't want all that power all the time. Speaking of which, let's get some batteries charged up, turn this thing on, and see if this thing can really do nearly 60 miles an hour. All right, we've got a fully charged 3S battery, but before we get started, I want to see if this thing actually does have a gyro. It says it does on the manual. And yes, it does. As you can see, the steering is moving by itself. That's really good to see on something that can do almost 60 miles an hour. Let's see what we can get out of this thing. Okay, that did not feel particularly fast. Full throttle. That is not nearly 60 miles an hour. Let's try one more quick pass. It is pretty darn stable, especially with that gyro. Steering feels pretty good. Let's see what we got there. That does not feel very fast though. Yeah, 31 miles an hour. Something's wrong. Okay, turns out I just did an RTFM. This thing actually comes out of the box restricted, and you have to do a little song and dance with the transmitter in order to unlock it. So to do that, we're just going to turn the car on. In order to unlock it, we just turn the steering one way all the way for 5 seconds. Lights will blink, then we turn them the other way for 5 seconds. Lights blink 3 times and now it's unlocked. That's actually a really nice feature for if you have little kids driving it and you don't want them to be able to unlock that top speed, but we do want to go top speed, so let's see what it can do. All right, fully unlocked. Let's see how she feels now. Oh yeah, she's got a little more vinegar in her now, and that's getting a little bit harder to control too. Definitely wants to wheelie, and the hard compound on those tires is letting it down a little bit, but let's see if we can get that top speed out of it. All right, can we go full throttle? That's not quite full throttle. That was about 3/4. Let's see if we can get full throttle and keep it under control. It does get a little squirrely. I'm glad it has that gyro. Full throttle, okay. Yeah, this is gonna be a little bit of a challenge. It definitely isn't the most stable thing in the world at those speeds, but it is a Mini, and Minis generally aren't stable at super high speed. Here we go. That's full throttle, and we've lost it. Yeah, unfortunately, those tires just don't have a ton of grip, and it does make it a little bit difficult to control. Let's see if we can get a good full throttle pass out of it. That's full throttle, and no, man, it just really wants to wipe out. Try one more time. Here we go. Full throttle. Now, that's full throttle, and we're losing it again. All right, we're gonna give it one more try. Hopefully these tires are getting a little bit of heat in them. Here we go. Full throttle. Okay, we got full throttle, and okay. I think that was enough for a top speed. Let's see what we got. 54 miles an hour, that's not quite the advertised 56, but it probably could do it with some better tires. Will it do a standing backflip? Oh, not quite. Let's try a little bit of a roll. Won't quite do a standing backflip. Of course, this thing is a stunt truck, so let's see how it does some stunts. We've got the tallest Pro Line ramp out here, and oh yeah, she jumps pretty well. Will it do a backflip on the backflip section? Oh, that was like a triple. That was pretty cool. All right, let's see if we can get a bigger jump out of it. Here we go. Whoa! Opened my mailbox. So whereas the tires don't really have quite enough grip for that full throttle pull, it definitely has enough jam for stunts and tricks, which is really good because that's what most people are gonna do with a car like this. All right, we've got the lower ramp out. Let's see if we can't do a longer jump. These ramps are really convenient. That was pretty good. Yeah, I really do like these ramps. These things are gonna be on the channel more. I wonder how they're gonna handle larger cars. They are vacuum formed, I think, or maybe blow molded, and they're fairly lightweight, but the plastic does seem pretty darn durable. Another big jump. Yeah, the thing jumps and handles in the air really, really well. I'm very impressed. It seems pretty durable too. Okay, so it's fast, though a little bit hard to control at high speed, and it handles jumps really, really well, but how does it handle rougher terrain? Now, I know some of you guys will say driving in this really tall grass is not fair for the car, but we have to see what it can do in various terrains, and a lot of people just don't have access to something that's gonna be super appropriate for this, and to be honest with you, it's actually holding up pretty well in this tall, wet grass. Yeah, it's jumping well, landing well, feels pretty good overall. The extra power it has makes a big difference. When you've got a low power car, it tends to get bogged down in the grass, and this just isn't doing that. All right, yeah, that grass is pretty thick, but this is a realistic situation. There are people that are gonna try to bash in this type of terrain. See what we can do. And we got a backflip out of it. I think those smaller ramps on the concrete are a bit more appropriate though. We've got some mulch over here we can mess around in, and this thing does like to pop a wheelie pretty much on command. It definitely has plenty of power, plenty of speed, and the drivetrain does seem reasonably durable. Trying to do those standing backflips on concrete is probably the worst thing you can do for a drivetrain, and it handles them just fine. It didn't handle that stick though. Although it's got the power to get off of it though, and having a lot of power definitely does help. But this thing really is made for bombing around on smoother surfaces, and it does a pretty good job on this concrete. I will say that the throttle and steering does have a little bit of a weird lag to it, but it's not as bad as some other cars I've built. If you're really susceptible to it, it might be a problem. but these fairly hard tires don't give you a ton of grip, and combined with the power, it does have a pretty balanced push on these hard surfaces and doesn't like to traction roll, which is good, especially with this kind of power and the kind of people that'll probably be driving something like this. Here's the thing though, I think these stock tires are holding the rest of this truck back, so why don't we swap them out for my favorite Trencher 2.2s? These things are going to balloon more, have more traction, and they're a little bit bigger. Obviously going to larger tires is going to be harder on the drivetrain. Of course, for the testing we're going to be doing, that's actually a good thing because I want to see just how durable it is. But that's not the only thing you need to consider when going to larger tires on an RC car. Larger tires also change your final gearing, and putting a bigger tire on is the exact same thing as putting a bigger pinion on. This means it's more likely that you're going to have cogging, and you're also more likely to overheat your motor, but there's one other thing to pay attention to. Going with bigger tires also means you get better ground clearance, but there's a potential drawback to that as well. Most of these cars are designed to have the chassis hit the ground before the suspension bottoms out. It's designed that way to protect the suspension components and to prevent them from absorbing too much force, but if the suspension bottoms out before the chassis does, you can risk breaking components that you wouldn't otherwise be breaking. This one bottoms out just fine, so let's go see just how this thing handles these bigger tires. All right, given my previous experience with these tires, I don't expect it to go any faster because they're not super stable, but we definitely need to at least give it a try, right? Let's get down there and see what we can do. All right, here we go. Ah, she's wanting to wheelie. That was almost full throttle. Whoa! She's on her wheels though. All right, let's try it again. Here it comes. The body's coming off. Hang on. All right, let's give that one more try. Head on down. And here we go. Full throttle. Oh, nope. Okay, no, we weren't able to get it to go any faster on-road, but is it more capable off-road? Whoa! These tires have so much more mass to them that these things do crazy flips. This is a great way to do some stunts, and it's a great way to make sure the drivetrain is as strong as it says it should be. Let's try that again. I think that was probably 3 or 4 there, pretty good. It's getting breezy out here. And yeah, these bigger tires definitely do handle better off-road. Let's try for a little bit of a front flip. Just like that, not too bad. This thing actually lands pretty well with the big jumps too. These bigger tires are letting me get on this ramp a lot better. Here we go again. Oh, missed it. Will it self-right? Oh yeah, hang on. That is hard on the drivetrain and it's still holding up. Let's try that one more time. Yeah guys, this thing seems pretty strong. These tires are way bigger and have way more mass than the stock tires, and it seems to be holding them well. And the controls aren't bad either, although it does do a little bit of cogging if you start accelerating really slowly. That's what I was talking about with that different gearing. And then finally, with the extra mass of the tires, will it do a standing backflip on concrete? Oh yeah. Man, that is hard on the drivetrain, as is self-righting, but yeah, it seems to be holding up really well. Nice. So there we go, guys, the DeeRC 8618. What do I think about this car? Well, they said it'll do 56 miles an hour. I got 54 out of it. I'm sure 56 is possible. And at least in my experience, that makes it pretty much the fastest mini basher you can buy out of the box. Can you change gearing on other vehicles and make them faster? Maybe. But again, that's right out of the box, and that's with a monster truck. Overall, that's pretty impressive. A little bit less impressive is the grip on these tires. I think it would be easier to go fast if these were a little bit grippier, but when you're just bashing around, this harder compound can be advantageous because it prevents the truck from traction rolling too easily. Overall, everything feels well built. There's not a lot of slop or play in any of the bushings, bearings, or other parts. The motor and ESC seem pretty well paired to each other. I'm not a huge fan of this receiver and transmitter. They worked fine, but they had a couple of weird lag issues that I just really didn't like. Overall, for this kind of car, I would call them just average. I think these batteries are pretty good, and you get 2 of them, which is nice. The included charger is one of those USB plug-in ones, which I don't don't really recommend, but it will get you started. And overall, I would say this is one of the stuntiest mini stunt trucks you can get out of the box. The top speed is nice, but the side benefit of that is wheel speed. And it's that wheel speed that gets you to be able to do big flips in the air. A lot of minis just can't do that, especially out of the box. But now we have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the price. This thing's about 160 bucks on Amazon. I do have a link down in the description, not an affiliate link, but it is there if you want to see it. And for that money, it is a pretty good car, though it's lacking in a few places that are going to make people think it isn't. The first one's the Philips hardware. A car at this level needs to have hex hardware. And the other one is the lack of waterproofing. I do understand that this system is designed for speed, but again, in this price range, it really should at least be water resistant. And looking at this board, I don't think it is. Ultimately though, it is a good, fun car. DeeRC has been around for a while, so getting parts probably isn't going to be an issue, at least for a few years. And if you want a Mini that's going to go really fast right out of the box, there aren't a lot of alternatives. That being said, if you want to watch more awesome content, you don't need any alternatives to these videos.